morning. It's been a few weeks. Diaries have not been kind to our recording schedule, so I'm sure the three people that listen to it might be quite disappointed. But how are you doing?
I'm good, David. Yeah, Easter, a lot of bank holidays, a lot of travel. Life happens in the interim.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. Okay, I kick things off. I got a question for you. Which country has the biggest, let's not say the biggest role to play in semiconductor and in microchip production, in end to end, in any part of the process. Which country, if you remove them from the face of the earth, there would be no further development. The semiconductor microchip business would effectively die. Which country would that be?
Taiwan. Absolutely Taiwan.
You would think so, but it's not.
Okay.
The country in question is actually Holland, the Netherlands.
Yeah. I know there's a relationship, but there's absolutely a fab relationship. But what's your conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion?
How did I come to that conclusion? I mean, I'll tell you why I don't think it is Taiwan, because Taiwan is the furthest, but they don't fabricate 100% of the chips that are out there. And obviously, chips are not all the same, right? You got memory chips and you got CPUs and GPUs and everything else, but the they don't manufacture 100% of it. Some of it is manufactured in mainland, some of it is manufactured in the west coast of the United States, some of it is manufactured in Korea, Japan. Like there's different pockets of it. Of course, Taiwan is by far the biggest fabricator. And so if Taiwan went offline, there would be obviously a very, very big impact to that. But the reality is the equipment that's required to manufacture, to fabricate these, you're operating on such a micro scale, whatever the correct terminology is, but it seems almost atomic, but it's obviously not. But it's extremely, extremely because basically you're putting more and more transistors effectively onto a chip, which is giving you that power, right? And there's one company in the world that effectively has the market share on the fabrication of all of these, right? And this is, I think, and I'm just bringing up the information now. So ASML is a Dutch company that does it. Now they're just so far ahead of everyone else that allows the breakthroughs that are happening, and they sell those. So a new piece of kit from them could be 300 million US,
Yeah.
and you would have engineers from ASML on site for the lifespan of that equipment. Like that, it is the real sharp point of engineering and manufacturing. Now, the continuous R&D that they do allows there to be these continuous breakthroughs that come specifically in what we're seeing now. These chips that are big chips that are being used for effectively there were kind of graphics before, and then it turned out those work very well, obviously in the the neural network and the AI space. But they're the ones who are driving that, and there's nobody else that's close. They're trying to catch up, but there's nobody that's doing that. And they have a new machine coming out in 2025, which is next year, which again will then see us go to that next level. So I thought that was quite an interesting piece of trivia. I think you may disagree, but the reality is that there is just nobody else that's doing that at the moment.
No, and it's a good point. So, the Dutch are absolutely making the machine that makes the machine.
Yeah.
And ASML are clearly the leaders in that space. And there can't be many. You can't, they're not the market for fabs isn't big enough to have massive competition. So these companies become a de facto monopoly. Um, but however, there's a symbiotic relationship between ASML and TSMC in the sense
Sure.
that you need people operating the machine. And my understanding of why TSMC has such a lead and why there is a dependence on Taiwan is a cultural issue around the way that the Taiwanese people think about their careers. And, they're very much in a mindset of, I'm going to invest 30 years at the same company, and I'm going to become an absolute master at my trade, and I have a loyalty towards my company. And, that is the reason why most fabs up to date in the US have failed, because, the US is a free market. What I'm going to do is every 3 years, I'm going to shop my skills around to the highest bidder for my skills. And you never really get into that minute detail, which is required to do, 4 nanometer, we'll be at 3 and 2 nanometer wafer. And, the margins for error in that require, craftsmanship that is tantamount to the Japanese masters of creating knives, where you go through this long apprenticeship, and there's this absolute minute detail.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. But yet you don't see that holding the US back in other areas of technology. But I mean, I'm sure there is some truth to it. Yeah, almost certainly. But there's been a lot of.
So Musk talks about it. Musk talks about, everybody thinks that technology is hard. Technology, his view is that manufacturing is far harder than the R&D cycle.
Yeah, sure. Sure, and that was pretty much heavy manufacturing in motor vehicles and all that. But I'm sure it does apply accordingly. But I think one of the interesting things I've discovered, I was doing a bit of research into kind of the global supply chain on chips, is one, the history of how we got here, and secondly, how globally I think you would battle to find a more globally integrated and dependent supply chain in anything else in the world. Because the thought at the moment is just that Taiwan fabricates everything. Most of it's designed in the US, gets fabricated there, and that's the big thing. And then China comes across and unifies Taiwan, and then that's all gone. But it's just simply not that at all, right? And it's quite interesting the way we've got here, because obviously, Texas Instruments were the first people on this journey, right? And seeing, how do you move away from transistors to silicon and semiconductors? And they obviously had a really big head start, which they kind of lost. And I guess the initial ones were more around memory than it was around compute. But then obviously they continued, and then Intel came in, and the rise of the desktop, and they were massive then, and you can imagine how they took over. But then Steve Jobs went to the head of Intel and said, we're bringing out the iPhone, and we need specific chips for that. And Intel passed on it, if you can believe it. Which is why that company we're talking about is based out of Cambridge in the UK. They picked it up. What is it called? It's called ARM. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then they obviously the compute handheld versus laptop or desktop. Obviously the number of units and how that's progressing has just been astronomical, and Intel just never managed to catch up to that. And then if you go back into mainland China, during the Cultural Revolution, one of the big issues there was that the scientific community and those who were in those type of roles were seen as being counter-revolutionists, because it was not this equal, each man has an equal impact, an equal role, and equal everything else. They were seen as elites, which is something you hear bandied around these days. So they were banished. These research scientists were banished to the fields, to farms, to go and work there. And after a while, they realized obviously what a mistake this was, and started to bring them back. But you can imagine, but I imagine that would have been no less than 10 years, 15 years before that started to happen. So they lost that, and there was a significant amount of scientific endeavor happening in mainland China prior to that. So that obviously then pushed them back. Taiwan at the same time then had picked up, slightly later had picked up, but by then, China was playing catch up. And then Taiwan, for many of the reasons that you've mentioned, have just got better and better and better at manufacturing at that scale. But it's such an integrated supply chain, because you need equipment from Europe, you need materials that come probably from Japan, maybe, I don't know, Korea, maybe. You need the manufacturing in Taiwan, you need the design that's happening, and all that kind of research that's happening in the US as well, and more and more and more. So this whole notion that that there's just one or two players. It's just simply not true. And I think this is actually, it gives me confidence that there is such an integrated supply chain, because there's no world without microchips. Not the way that we know it. There's nothing. And so, no matter how you may have leaders with varying ambitions and thought process, there is a reality that's gluing everyone together. But obviously, this has then started the arms race to who can be self-sufficient. But that is no easy feat.
It's definitely no easy feat. And, if we look at, the Intel, you and I on message swap some information on Intel building their fab facility in the US. And
Yeah.
the first alarm bell that goes off for me is Intel's core business is losing money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Second alarm bell that goes off for me is that there's a government subsidy
Yeah.
involved with this. And, the third alarm bell goes off for me around the labor pool, that, you spinning up a masterful craft competing with people, the best people in the world, which is subsidized by government. Your point around Intel missing the whole SoC, the system on a chip, revolution to ARM. We have to say that Intel's not, in substance, is not a particularly well-run organization. So, why would they be the people to disrupt the people who have this elegant, highly integrated supply chain?
And what concerns you about the government? They being government backed.
Yeah, just for me, so incentives start coming in. So immediately what I start seeing is, for me, almost every successful company that I know has cut its teeth in free markets.
Yeah.
It has built a business case. It has, raised the capital. It has held itself honest, deploying the capital, and shareholders have then held the management team honest to build a great business. As soon as government starts writing, and my understanding is it's between an 8 and $12 billion check.
Yeah.
This is free money. All the incentives are gone. There's a lot of cheap money going around. It's the NASA SpaceX scenario.
Yeah, no, sure. And I think we discussed this in episode 2 or 3 around accountability, right? And it's the same. I mean, like, it's the same as the SoftBank money. When it's an endless checkbook, then the accountability goes, the urgency goes. There's a bit of suffering, as Jensen says, and a bit of hardship really focuses the mind and the organization. But that's not to say that there isn't a short-term role to be played, because if you look at a number of things, like, so you look at the technological revolution that comes, or move forwards that come during times of war, and that's effectively government sponsored, right? Well, it's sponsored by the people, because that's it usually comes back in taxes. But the point is that it's not just industry acting on its own. You think about all the work that Alan Turing did during that time, and how that got that set us off on this age of compute. So there's that. In your example about NASA, there was a time when that did work, right? Because when there was a short term by decades, and let's get to the moon, government required funding that went into it, and an urgency and everything else, then there was accountability and urgency, and then they got there, right? But then obviously in the long term, I think I would agree with you that it doesn't necessarily work.
The nuance here is that we're not talking about R&D, we're talking about manufacturing. So, for me, if government gets involved in subsidizing R&D, which they effectively do, they do it through university grants, they do it through research grants, the military DARPA, there are many government-backed R&D funds. And there's absolutely a place for that because of the amount of capital. And, in R&D, you need to be prepared to get 1,000 things wrong for 20 years for that one success. But we're not talking about R&D. We're talking about government subsidizing a for-profit company to build manufacturing to remove dependence on Taiwan.
Yeah.
I don't, structurally, would I put money in that? If there was a bond or something I could buy, I would absolutely not back it.
Yeah. Okay. The very interesting point, and I would agree with you. I wouldn't put a penny in it either. But not for the reason because it's government subsidy. Wouldn't put a penny in it because I don't believe the leadership has the ability to get there. If Because if you think about it, Tesla took government funding,
Yeah,
and it used it as an accelerator. And you back Elon and all the team that was there. They took the money, they accelerated, they paid it back, right? Like that's a
100%.
great example of it. So
Great.
therefore, I think you can distinguish between the subsidy isn't necessarily the crime, but the point is, and I think to your point, a subsidy is never going to make up for the shortcomings of poor leadership, right?
Exactly it. The jockey is materially flawed. Intel has gone from, in the last 20 years, they've been on the slippery slope of being, the number one chip manufacturer. If you wanted the best performing chip, you bought the Intel CPUs, and they've missed the smartphone market. And now they've missed the GPU market. So they've missed
Yeah.
two tidal wave, multi-billion dollar markets.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What would change now? But interestingly enough, and this will come as no surprise, obviously, um, China is deeply concerned around how integrated the supply chain for chips are, and is doing everything they can to grow self-sufficiency where they can. So some of it is easily solved as an unified Taiwan and mainland China, and you've got fabrication. The more difficult side was on the design side. So there's all of these private equity firms that have been, set up or bought around the world, mainly in Western countries, with Western leadership and so forth. So, it's not immediately obvious who have been going and buying up, chip researchers, etc. Significantly. Now, often they get blocked, especially in the US. They figure out what's up and they block it. In the UK, they haven't. And there's been a number that have been sold. They're all in the interest of free, global trade and enterprise and whatever else. But that absolutely is sovereign wealth that's going into that to try and secure that future. And some of it they may get some mild success, but I think that the equipment and the hardware that's required for the fabrication is where there's just no obvious road to how they would get to the level that they need to be. But it is an active part of their strategy at the moment, is moving away from that dependency, or trying to move away from it.
I don't, for me, and we've had this conversation on message quite a few times. You know, I don't see the evil that the US portrays in China. Every time the US refers to China, it's the communist party, and this big evil. What war has China entered recently? What
Yeah.
sovereign nation has China invaded? What is the substance of this evil?
Sure. I mean, I think the reason why they call them the Communist Party is because literally their name, the CCP,
No,
right?
I do, but it's I remember, David. So we were doing an evaluation for a customer on VC, on video conferencing, and we were looking at Zoom, and we were looking at Google. And Google's biggest selling point is fear mongering, because Zoom is a clearly better product than Google's ever had. Fear mongering around, do you trust the Chinese Communist Party around your data? I don't see the substance in this. I really don't.
I mean, I don't know. Do you mean that you'd be happy for them to have your data, or are you saying that you don't think they have interest in it?
I don't, I just don't, if I look at, the countries that have caused the biggest devastation in the last 20 years,
Yeah.
China's not on that list. The US is on that list. Britain's on that list. Iran's on that list. Iraq's on that list. But China's not on that list.
Yeah, okay, sure. But two things can be true at the same time, right? you know,
Okay, but
you know, that
is this
doesn't that doesn't absolve them of or because they're not the worst doesn't necessarily absolve them of any harm that may be created or any threat that may be there. Although I would agree with you, I don't think the threat is particularly high. I don't think that there's necessarily. I think they're very very clear about which territories they have a claim to, some with greater legitimacy than others. I mean, obviously, what they're doing around the seas of the Philippines is probably very questionable. Hong Kong, I think there was always the agreement with the Brits that it would be given back, which obviously happened, same as Macau. And then there is a strong argument to be made that unification of Taiwan and mainland China is a Chinese problem, right? Because that was, that was all part of the revolution. Taiwan was always part of mainland China. There was a change of there was the revolution, there was the change of control, and obviously they ran, those that escaped managed to run to Taiwan. But it is an unresolved issue, and it's definitely not one that I think the world should go to war against. I think it's something for China to figure out. But I don't think, to your point, I don't think that there is, they're very clear where they have ambitions, territorial ambitions, and I don't think it's probably.
they're not gun happy. I still, one of the geopolitical events that still doesn't sit well with me is the Iraq War. Where Tony Blair and Bush Jr. rattled the saber around weapons of mass destruction.
Sure.
Invaded a sovereign country. Sent hundreds of thousands of troops to this country and found nothing.
Yeah, sure. But I think, I mean, we know. I don't think there's anyone that's going to argue with you on that point. And of course, I mean, there's a good case to be made that US or Western intervention, usually led by the US, whether there has ever been an post-World War II, has there ever been an improvement in the country in which the intervention has occurred, right? Regardless of how much of a how the rulers or leaders in that country may have been abusing their people, their power, and everything else, the intervention has never left them well off. No matter how bad Saddam Hussein was, Iraq is not better off now than it was with him, and that's not a value statement around his actions or anything like that. It's I think it's more observational, I would say.
Afghanistan, Vietnam, we can come up with all these examples. And, my issue is that, I don't have a horse in the race. I think the US is a remarkable economy. I think, I admire the US on many levels. I don't see this illusion, which I believe the the military industrial complex is pulling over us. I don't see this illusion of, China being this massive threat, this massive global threat. I see China as, a country that has largely been a great and essential trading partner for most countries in the world.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, of course, they were the factory of the world for a while, but their capabilities are fast improving, and there's a lot of innovation and technological leadership that's coming out of there. If you look at EVs and things like that, obviously the biggest EV producer in the world. So I think that they've gone a long way from being the world's factory to being a player that's there. I mean, I think that their concerns are probably more around they're on their way, but they're not there. They need sustained, continuous, significant growth year after year after year to achieve their ambitions. And I think the equation gets quite ropey quite quickly when that growth doesn't come through. So I think that's probably what they would be more concerned about than playing than a territorial game. However, I do think that they do a lot of checkbook diplomacy, specifically in places like Africa, and that they build roads, they build railways, heavy infrastructure, stuff that costs a lot. Invariably, these countries can't pay. I mean, it's the Western trick that was perfected over all the years. But there is a way of probably securing resource and having geopolitical influence, because you have this block of countries that that ideologically side with you because of the checkbook, right? So I think
Yeah,
that they
but
probably they don't just keep you within their own borders. I think they would be naive to think that. But
I
it's from
would,
nothing else.
having experienced this firsthand, so there's absolutely geopolitical influence based on capital. But I've also firsthand seen in Mozambique as an example where what the US do is make a big pledge. We will pledge
Yeah,
$100 million towards infrastructure or hunger or whatever the latest cause is, where what the Chinese will do is come in and build a power station, build a road. So,
yeah,
I think if you have to ask the people on the ground, who has had a bigger impact on their day-to-day lives, the people on the ground would likely say the Chinese, because the problem with that $100 million US investment is probably 20 million of those dollars actually reach the people who need them.
yeah, sure. But again, two things can be true at the same time. It doesn't, one doesn't necessarily mean the other is right. But anyway, I think for China's growth, I think the key to that is, they achieved all of this growth because they were a centrally planned economy, and they loosened that up. And I think a lot of it started in the famines, and they allowed the farmers to go and keep a certain amount of what they produced for themselves, which immediately started to incentivize the farmers to find more effective ways of producing. And I think that spread from there, and they could see how their growth would come. And the more they kind of opened up for business, the more they took, by now, maybe 400, 500 million people out of poverty, I would say, probably somewhere around there.
Yeah.
But the trend at the moment is not that. The trend is to want to have the cake and eat it, right? The big crackdown on the big tech companies, ask Jack Ma, he disappeared for a while, as of many others. So I think they want the control, but they want the benefit of a free trading environment. So I think that's ultimately probably which would be the biggest hurdle for them to overcome. And also, people don't like being, I think nationalistic pride in China is probably quite high at the moment, and I'm sure rightly so for many reasons. But people don't like being told what they can and can't do, and listen to, and ultimately think. And the trend does seem to be going more in that direction, within its own borders. Obviously, highly censored internet. Obviously, no access to various big platforms in the US, whether that's US platforms, whether that's a good or bad thing. So I think the trouble is going to come from within, because at some stage people they get frustrated with that, don't they?
They do, and you raise a great point around China, when it comes to economics, is quite schizophrenic,
Yeah,
and their behavior is absolutely schizophrenic and quite questionable around, this need and want of innovation and progress and modernization, but then at the same time, this need to control.
yeah,
But then your other point around access to information, what we're starting to see in the US now is a bit of a reversal around, is you know un is un managed social media access good for a general population? Should there be age restrictions on social media? Should there be time constraints on things like gaming? And my understanding is this is one of the things that the Chinese have done. You can
yeah,
use the Chinese version of TikTok, but you can only use it so long. You can play games, but if you need to be a certain age, and you can only use it so. I think time will tell what the right etiquette is around consuming digital content. And I don't think the US is right, and I don't think China is necessarily right either.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think I would agree. I think there's a conflation of issues there. I think you're right. Just like unfettered access to social media is not healthy at any
Yeah.
age, right? And developmental age, I'm sure, even worse. I think, you know, autocratic behavior can drive performance, can drive improvements in the short run, but in the long run, I think that the cost of that is extremely high. Because the question I would ask, and I know this is not the point you were making, but the question I would ask is, who in the US government do you want to making the decision for you around how long you can look at Twitter or Instagram or whatever? Like this is, I think it's the wrong solution to the right problem. And there is a role for government, but I would say the unintended consequences of government getting involved and the inefficiencies and then it's never the solution. The best solutions lie outside of that. It lies in family units making the right decisions around having parents that are engaged in their kids' lives. It's learning as a society. As voting with our checkbook. Like that's where the sustained. So I think China may get some benefit from this, but I think this idea around do we trade some civil liberties because we think that we'll be safer? I think it's such a slippery slope, and it was used originally for safety, as in security, physical security, and now it's the safety as in our, like all the dangers of social media, which are real. All right, I mean, there's no doubt about it. So I think I'm on board, but yeah.
I'm in for minimal government. I'm absolutely on the same page as you are, that it's a completely slippery slope once you start getting regulatory control in anything. But it doesn't take away from my point that that the Chinese approach, because there is a problem. We both agree
Sure.
there is a problem. What the US have done is taken one approach, and the Chinese have taken a completely different approach. And what we're seeing now is that neither approach is completely effective.
Yeah.
And we've yet to find a solution. And I'm in your movie. I'm in your movie of saying that this is a family unit issue, and families
Yeah.
need to decide. However, families typically learn from I would learn from my parents. And the challenge we have with technology is we don't have this etiquette of it yet. So we all just making this stuff up as we go along.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, there is also the power of the individual to choose. I gave up social media 2 years ago, maybe, because I could observe for myself where my short-term attention was going, or long-term attention, how that was, degrading. I could tell my ability to read long-form books was obviously not as it used to be. I could see the hours that was being wasted. I could see the lack of value that was being added to my life, and I just I could make that decision for myself, so that I could better use my time elsewhere, which I mean, I try and still keep up to date with it and understand what's happening in it, because there is relevance, but there is that personal decision. But it's also like smoking, right? I mean, it took a generation, good education, it's not good for you. We didn't, the government put in things, they made it more expensive, and they put all the pictures on the boxes, and you couldn't advertise or whatever. But that's not really what's changed. What's changed is that it's become, people have realized, new generation comes up, why would I do this? Of course this isn't going to be good for me, and they've gone through it. And I think, unfortunately, to the generation that's coming up now, I think that they unfortunately will bear the biggest scars from this. But ultimately, society is not going to continue in a way that is self-harming to that extent. Like at some stage there'll be the learnings, people will step back, the mood will shift on it. Well, that's what I think, at least.
I think there's not a lot of light between us on this topic. So,
Yeah.
I had a view of quite a few years ago, about 5 years ago, that we will approach peak tech. That the human condition in itself will reject technology as something that is counterproductive. And you've got to that point. I've also got to that point. I have very little social media. I have X. I have a Facebook account because I use it for marketplace. I have literally zero followers or friends or whatever it might be.
Very depressing.
Similar to our podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, your examples that you've given on smoking, smoking is something which is static. I downloaded TikTok because I wanted an educated view of what TikTok was. And, TikTok is designed, it really is designed to keep people on the platform. And, what we're dealing with is this social media addiction, and the companies providing the product are getting more and more sophisticated around making it more and more addictive. Um, let me say it again. I think you and I are in the same, in the minimum government, the individual needs to make a decision, and, that's the underlying solution.
Yeah, in education. All right, let's change gears a little bit.
Just before we change gears,
Or we can stay in the scare.
no, so just before we move off
Yeah.
China, um,
Oh, yes. By the
one
way,
of
this segment is brought to you by the
the
TPP and
communists.
its spokesperson, Tony Silva.
So the where the AI conversation is increasingly shifting is around compute. And it's obvious in Nvidia's share price. It's obvious in Azure. It's obvious in many places that compute is a massive investment area. Um,
Yeah.
but linked to compute, or one-to-one relationship with compute is power, is energy.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should discount a country like China's ability to build nuclear power stations at scale, build solar at scale. And it's not hard to imagine a future where the limitation around AI is not necessarily around GPUs, it's around the power to power the GPUs.
Yeah. I mean, I would say data, GPUs, and then no, I would say sorry, data, power, and then GPUs in that order. I would say.
Absolutely. I would completely agree with you. And I saw some statistics recently where the data centers account for 3% of the power consumed in the US today. The prediction is by 2020, that will be 19%.
By 20 when?
By 2030, that will
Okay.
be 19%.
19. Massive. Yeah, indeed. Every celebrity that ever came out and said, say no to nuclear power, there was that whole drive, and it was like, nuclear power is the wrong thing and we should never do it and whatever else. Every celebrity that got on board with that, they should have their names plastered on billboards and explain why they've robbed a generation of an age of abundance, or certainly delayed it. Anyway, let's not bang that drum. So let's move on. Sam Altman's interview with Lex Friedman.
Yes.
I mean, I would say that is arguably one of the most frustrating interviews I think I've ever listened to. I was on a flight back from somewhere and I was listening to it, and just it was just ridiculous. It was absolutely, absolutely ridiculous. His idea around, I just talk to everyone and that's fine. Well, that's cool. I think that's the right thing to do. But if you're going to talk to them, have proper conversations. Ask them a stupid question at one stage, like, with the advancement of AI comes great power. Do you trust yourself with that power? What the fucking question? What the fuck type of question is that? Because of course, all you say is, well, I think there's a structure in place and there's governance, and like it's all just bullshit, right? In that Bloomberg interview with Mira, I think it was Bloomberg, and Mira was the CTO. It was the CTO at this stage. I think maybe still is. And the interviewer said, "Can you tell us whether Sora is trained on YouTube videos or not?" And the CTO says, I wouldn't really know the answer to that. Well, then you should either be fired as a CTO, or you should be fired for lying. Which one is it?
Yeah.
Lex couldn't even get in 2 hours and whatever. He couldn't even get a question close to getting that, that close to him. I was very frustrated. What did you think?
Look, I think that I probably understand both parts of this. You would expect that, if you have somebody that's new, that's a public figure, you would ask that person the hard questions. And I think Lex did a poor job around. He kind of asked the hard questions and then he capitulated on them. And, but at the same time, a guy like Lex is also walking a fine rope around, if he pushes his guests too hard, people will just refuse to come onto his platform. Do I think it was a poor interview? Absolutely. I think it was a poor interview. But at the same time, I'm beginning to ask a question around, is OpenAI still, is OpenAI going to be where the innovation of the future comes from?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fact that we've got multiple models today that have beaten GPT-4, and GPT-4, is still the model that they've got. I also recently saw something around Sora and the reason why Sora isn't publicly available. And apparently, the 1 minute video that they generate
Yeah.
requires 1 hour of H100 computing time.
Which is why it's not GA, obviously.
Absolutely. It's just this complete research project that's requires a ridiculous amount of compute.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so we'll get on to where the where who's actually leading the way. What I would say is when I look at Sam Altman, I think I've got to the stage now where I am extremely, extremely, I'll be short on him, not long. I think he is, I think there's smoke and mirrors and there's no substance. I think what's really driving OpenAI is the researchers and the work that's being done there. And I'm not sure how much of that is him. You look at his career before that. I mean, I think it's alleged that he was asked to leave YC, which obviously is never good. He had one business before called Looped, which raised 40 something million and got sold for 50. So, I mean, okay, fine, but not great. You can imagine. Like, what is it? And then there's so much lack of transparency around what he does. Was he leading OpenAI's VC fund? Was he not? Was it in his own name? Was it not? There was somebody who was registered leader who didn't even exist. you know, wasn't actually a real person. Like, what is actually going? He doesn't own any equity in it. So what is he doing? Like, is he just a salaried employee? Which of course he's not. Of course he's not. We know that. So I think his value to the world will soon be discovered. Or
And
lack thereof.
I think lack thereof. You also have to ask the question around, well, if OpenAI is this R&D kind of innovation hub, what have they come up with? The transformer was come up by, Google came up with
Google,
the
yeah, yeah,
transformer. What they did is they refined an idea that Google had, and it turns out that that Anthropic and a whole bunch of other companies can have taken that same idea and have eclipsed where OpenAI is. So
yeah,
if they get some magic sauce around GPT-4,
yeah,
it's not that magical. Is the conclusion. I think that Sam's a good deal maker. I think he's a good politician. But history, I don't think I personally don't see OpenAI coming up with the next big breakthroughs.
yeah, yeah. And I think the problem that I have is I don't know how to measure it because there was that article you sent me around Apple and they've been busy and it was all the things that we had said. By the way, it's going to be an extension of Siri or the new Siri and whatever else. But they say, well, even the low parameter models are performing as well as GPT-4. Well, what does it actually mean? What is the performance metric? How do you measure how successful and how good these GPTs are? Because I mean, it's certainly not universally understood.
No, so companies like Hugging Face have leaderboards, and what these leaderboards will do is they'll run a maths test or an English test or the bar exam. So there are objective measures, and what we're doing is we're measuring this against humans, and then we're measuring the models against each other.
So I think that we've outgrown that. I think that was 3.5 turbo was around. Could you do the bar exam? And I think they all do. I don't think that's enough at the moment. I think what what we're looking for these is a higher level of intelligence that's not just necessarily, it's reasoning and it's all sorts of things that I don't think, I think it's a start, but I also don't think that that's a universally accepted measure, because every time somebody was talking about these new GPTs, they would be more empirical on their performance analysis or appraisal of it. So I'll give you an example. You bring a new car out, you got one of a number of KPIs. You can say 0 to 60 is, or 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, 60 miles comes in certain, its fuel economy is this, power is that. Like, it's very clear. And then you can say, you can kind of top trumps it and see what's there. I really don't think that exists in this new world in which we live.
I'd like to look into it. I think that if it does exist, it probably exists in subsets. Something like coding as an example, creativity as an example, English, maths. I think these things probably exist in a subset. And the problem with data is that you can pretty much get data to show you what you want. And I do think that that's the risk of where we are at the moment, is that companies cherry pick the data to make their models look as good as possible.
Yeah, yeah, sure. But I mean, there's the independence that should be defining these metrics. Anyway, you can look into it, but the fact that we have to look into it and it's not universally accepted or understood, obviously, does speak quite big volumes, I would say. But it does seem like that Apple has something coming up. But the information is very sparse at the moment. I mean, they had a number of models from 80 million to, what was it, 32 billion, something like that, in parameters. Seems to be pretty good. Is it driven by the own chips? Is it not? How does it operate? Will it be, will the 80 million be in the phone? Will it not? I think more questions than answers. I guess in June we'll probably find out more on that.
Yeah, I think the event in June is going to be interesting. There's been, there's been a lot of rumors. There are rumors around a Google-Apple partnership, and Apple getting a version of Gemini. If that is true, I would see that as an interim step. I don't think Apple would go that. I don't think Apple would partner with their biggest competitor on something that strategic. Secondly, I also think that, if I was in an innovation role inside Apple, I would architect AI very differently. I would look at, how many billion edge computing devices that I have. And I would then look at distributing that workload to the edge and then bringing that edge computing centrally. The challenge with that architecture is it's a deviation from Apple's privacy. Apple traditionally has built their privacy policy on the fact that your data stays on your handset. The deviation, and I don't think that consumers will necessarily push back at it, because am I willing to give up data in exchange for convenience? And I think if the value proposition is strong enough, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what it is, because no one needs like a Siri that's just a little bit better than it is now. Like, that's not gonna change the world. It's gonna be the robot without the body, right? It's got to be the ability to genuinely have real agency, that you could tell it to go and find all the flights flying to Copenhagen, arriving between these times, tell me the cheapest one, and go and book it and put it in my credit card and put it into my account and book a car to pick me up from the airport. Like, if it doesn't do anything, if it can't do that, if it's just a more intelligent Siri, then no one wants it. I'm telling you, nobody wants it. It's not going to move the dial. We're not going to pay for it. We're not going to sell our data for it. Like, it's just, it really needs to move it on.
No, so for me, this is the killer app, which whether Apple have the courage to do this or not is going to be the question. Siri constantly listening to all my conversations And at any point in time, I can ask Siri a question on a conversation that Siri's listened to. So, whether it's, Siri, tell me about the actions in the last meeting. Siri, suggest to me when I should schedule this meeting based on what you know about me.
Yeah.
Your point around the aeroplane, not having to give Siri that all the meta information because Siri's already listened. So then
Yeah.
say Siri, Siri, when would be the best time for me to go to London? Well, Tony, you've spoken to your partner about a holiday in the UK. Tony, you've got these other commitments that you've made. This is when the bank holidays are. So, based on what I know about you, this would be the best time for you to go to the UK.
Yeah.
That for me is the killer application.
Exactly, and it has to get there. And if it doesn't, if it's not there, I don't think it's gonna. I think it'll just be lost in the noise of everything else that's out there at the moment.
But I
Uh,
think that the challenge that Apple have is, and I don't, it's not a technical challenge; it's a change management challenge. Is that will people accept, would you sign up for that? Would you trust Apple with every single conversation, listening to your life 24/7?
I think it does.
Okay. I don't. But I don't think it does.
The coincidence of adverts that come up when a conversation is had, the lived experience is just the chances of it not happening. I think now are dwindling. Is
I
my
think
lived
it,
experience.
I think it's confirmation bias. I think, my view is that you underestimate the biases that we have and, and how strong confirmation bias is.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, then answer to your question, no, you wouldn't want you. I think there was times that I would, but there's definitely times that I wouldn't. Okay. Anyway, let's see. Let's watch that one. I think there's going to be a lot coming. And then we're quite short on time. Just two other things I wanted to get your view on. Number one was obviously Tesla having a bit of a tough time in the first quarter, and there's much glee and you know there's much glee and people are very happy that obviously they like to see Elon having a tough time of it. So we'll see what happens in the long run there. However, what I did see was, and let me just get the information on this, that the FSD V12 reactions from obviously a friendly audience and those who are Tesla friendly are saying it's like nothing they've ever seen before. And this is obviously we discussed this a couple of episodes back around how they have true AI learning from the ground up, no rules, figuring it out themselves based on the behavior of good drivers. But they're saying it's like magic, it's incredible. They've never seen anything like it. So I think if we see the Tesla stock come off a little bit, this could be a very real buy opportunity. And this is obviously not financial advice, but if you game it, if you game theory it, potentially there's a real buy opportunity now because that's to get that right to the extent that they seem to be, it's going to revolutionize everything. And if they're at the forefront of it, they'll be licensing that. It will make Uber successful and highly profitable overnight because they'll lose the drivers. Well, not overnight because you're going to manufacture all these cars and that. But there's potentially hugely like it can change the way civilization looks. I would say it's probably that big. Um, so what do you think? Are they onto something here?
Yeah, I do. I think, direct answer to your question. And the reason I think that is, you know, Elon's got a track record of playing long games
Mm-hmm.
and winning at
Yeah,
long, complex games. And um, you know, FSD is a enabler for the robo taxi. And to your point, the robo taxi has the opportunity to disrupt transportation as we know it. The other reason why I would back Elon is because, he's also shown that he has the ability to manufacture at scale. He has multiple factories
Yeah.
around the world. He's got multiple factories in the US. He's got a factory in China. He's got a factory in Germany. And my understanding is they constantly opening more factories. You couple that with demand for something like the Cybertruck.
Yeah.
If he has a medium-term crunch,
Yeah.
my belief is he's got a short-term crunch on his numbers, not a medium or long-term crunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that short-term crunch turns into a medium-term crunch, all he then needs to do is ratchet up manufacturing on the Cybertruck.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and he'll get through this, no doubt. I think what we're seeing in the Tesla numbers are probably a little bit of cooling in the EV sector in itself. I mean, I think he's by no means the only one who's seeing a bit of contraction or potentially less demand in that market. But I think the reason why it's interesting to me, why it takes it to the next level, is because if he can prove he can take something as complex as self-driving, because it is complex, right? It's in this world that's full of ambiguity, full of erratic behavior, full of variables that you can't control. If he can use AI to master a task like that, I'm telling you, you will put him at that. I would put Tesla as the most important AI company in the world then, because there is no other AI that's having a bigger impact. There would be no other application of AI that would be as impactful as that. And if they can do that, believe me, that's just the start. And we know this because on their robot, what's it called?
Optimus.
Optimus. They're using the same thing there, right? So that's already the next application of this technology, assuming that it is a winner, and it does seem the indications seem to be that that could be the case. I think just puts us in a really puts them in an extremely strong case, because then it's not, then it's real world, right? Would you agree?
I would agree. I think that, I think 2 episodes ago, our time frames, our time horizons were different on a
Vastly different. Yeah.
vastly different on a general purpose robot. And, for me, and I've been thinking about this quite a lot. So, the one challenge which Tesla is working on is a world model.
Yeah.
And it seems like Tesla's on the right trajectory to solve a world model when it comes to driving.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, the reason why driving is a more simple problem than a general purpose robot is that the amount of time it takes a human being to, handle a mud like this elegantly is
Mm-hmm.
is millions and millions of hours. As a child, you fumble around with a toy and you drop it, and then as an adolescent, you drop it less, and you really start through this constant interaction with the world, start building up the dexterity
Yeah.
needed to handle something like this elegantly. And for me, that's a big problem. That's a bigger problem than language. It's a bigger problem than driving, because, once you've got that, driving is a subset. The reason it takes you, when you're a teenager or driving age, the reason it takes you maybe 6 or 10 lessons to learn to drive is you building off a basis to do other things.
Mm-hmm. Sure. 20 hours is what they say, by the way.
Okay, so 20 hours, but that 20 hours is built on the millions of hours
Yeah,
that
of
you
course.
working to
Yeah.
get one.
Yeah, of how you use your sensors and actuators. You've got 16 years of mastering that. So I think there is truth in what you say. I do think that if you can conquer something like self-driving
Yeah.
with all of its complexity, I think it's a bigger thing. I think it's potentially a bigger thing than we think. And you know, interesting. We'll see. Look, I know we're short on time. Yeah.
The only light between us on this topic is the time. So,
Yeah, of
for
course.
me, the trajectory is we will solve self-driving in scale in the next 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
We will then solve specific robot applications, things like robots in manufacturing, robots in warehousing, robots to do very focused tasks. We'll probably solve that in the next 5 to 7 years. That technology will then get refined, and those specialist tasks will then build on each other. And my view is in the next 10 to 15 years, we will have general purpose robots that we can direct at different tasks.
I think either you or I or both of us will have a robot in our house within 5 years. Write that down. Let's
Well,
put
yeah, we'd
this.
need to define that a little bit more clearly, because
I'll put a Bitcoin on that. I'll bet you a Bitcoin on that, which is probably be worth about $300,000 by then, which we'll pick up next time. We actually do need to talk about crypto on the next one. Tony, it's been good to chat to you as always. Let's not let another 2 weeks go, and then we will let's do this again next week.
Yeah, always good chatting with you, my friend.
All right, okay. Have a good one, man. See you later.